I also suspect the Air is not going to sell well. I think it is a very...
I don't know who wants this phone.
I think it's a very interesting product. I am very glad Apple made it. I'm glad that they're going to it seems already they are going to promote the hell out of it. I don't know who it's for.
Where do you land in terms of like, I'm just a person, I have an iPhone 13 that is like on its last legs. It's time for me to upgrade, and I'm just earnestly trying to decide which iPhone to buy. I'm not like coming to it with any preconceived notions. Who is the Air the right phone for?
I presume they exist. This is what you were saying earlier. I think that there are presumably people who will say, or who will see this and say, oh my God, this is incredible. Even though it has not a stellar camera, and even though the battery life may be trash, I must have it because it just looks so cool.
So I'm on my way home because my family took advantage of one of AT&T's trade-in deals. We went through Costco a few years ago, and they gave us a bunch of relatively good deals for our service. And we've been with AT&T for a while. We had a period where we were with T-Mobile for a bit, but all the carriers offer these trade-in deals at the beginning of iPhone season, kind of as these phones are released, encouraging people to upgrade. And so because we had a version of we had an iPhone 14 that was no longer functional, we could trade it in and upgrade to the iPhone 17 line. And this year, because there has been some interesting shakeups in the lineup, our phones have arrived and everybody's gotten a slightly different setup. And so this has become an opportunity for me to investigate a little bit about who in my family has gotten which phone and why they've gotten it. And then importantly, it'll give us a point of reference in the future after, let's say a couple of months, maybe a year, what they thought of their phones throughout the year. So I thought that may be kind of fun to do on the channel. So let's go home really quick.
We had an anonymous person write in to say, I work for one of the big 3 US telecom carriers and have heard that over the first 72 hours of pre-orders, the Air made up less than 5% of sales. The problem with reports about early iPhone sales isn't that they're untrue, but that they're out of context. The type of people who rush into Apple stores in mid-September to buy new iPhones are not the same people who are buying iPhones the rest of the year.
When Steve Jobs came back to Apple, he famously created a simpler product lineup that looked a little bit like this. His goal was to simplify Apple's product lineup from dozens of products into just 4. So he could put, as he put it, the A team on every one. And so as he came back, they started to roll. They took their successful PowerBook, which was their Pro notebook, and revved it to make it better than it was before. Really simple. Pretty soon, they also did their Power Mac, their Pro desktop computer. And then, in a fateful moment, they released the iMac. I've told this story before on the channel, and many other people have told it many times before, but this was their first real consumer desktop when Steve Jobs came back. And it was, according to many people, the computer that turned around Apple, one of Johnny Ive's original major contributions to the company during the new Steve Jobs era. And of course, their consumer notebook, the final one remaining, was the iBook. Now this was 1997. In terms of executing the strategy, this iBook was the last of them. It happened in 1999. And so within a few years of Jobs' return to Apple, they'd created the entirety of their product matrix and continued to execute on these 4 products.
But you were saying you realized that made you realize.
Yeah, I just realized that. Like, whoa, okay.
So you've had it for a day, though. Tell me what your reaction is.
I like it. So one of the things that there's some truth to some of the reviews. Like the one thing is that this does get hot up here.
Okay.
And it gets hot when there is a constant use. Like if I'm on my phone for, I don't know, 10 minutes, you'll feel this get warm.
Really?
But throughout the day, if you're just using your phone periodically for like minutes at a time, this doesn't seem to get hot. So the processing, whatever processing happens while you're using it on a continuous basis, puts a lot of demand on the phone, and then this gets warm.
I've been living with the iPhone Air, playing with the iPhone 17 Pro, but living with the Air because it seems the most new, right?
Yep.
I mean,
Yep,
we
makes
kind of
sense.
talked about this on the last episode.
The iPhone Pro, if anything, is just more pro. I think we sort of get the idea.
Yeah.
How's the iPhone Air?
Battery life has been surprisingly good.
The batteries seem to be okay. Again, keeping in mind that I'm not one to sit down and stare at my phone for an hour at a time. It's just, periodic moments throughout the day.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really have a chance to get that hot. And the battery doesn't really drain.
If Apple is on to something, it is that there are two groups of people. Everybody I've shown it to owns an iPhone Pro.
Because I've never had any Maxes.
Yeah.
So
You always got the smaller of the two.
right.
Yeah.
and I think the only thing that makes this acceptable is that it's thinner,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and lighter, right? Like, there's a big part of it. Yeah.
and another thing too, I just realized too, is my wallet. So you know,
Yeah.
you have a heavy phone like this, plus you have a wallet.
Yeah.
Then it
You're like
really
back to like
gets heavy.
1990.
It really gets heavy. It's like a brick phone.
Yeah.
Right?
And there's two groups of people. There's the people who ultimately I'm going to be like, you know, which is that I can't give up those other camera lenses,
Right.
you know, like I use them. I really do use them too much. And then there's the other group who either admit to me or when I ask them, say they never switch the camera lens when they open the camera app. They open the camera app and they use the default camera and that's it.
Were you ever using like the 0.5x?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, okay.
I was, but you know that's rare, and I'm sure I'll miss it when I'm in those moments. But for the most part, on a day-to-day basis, this will work fine. I can work around that.
It's not going to get you the advantages of the wide and the macro. Like, of course it's compromised, but it is also a very good single camera. And again, I say, for some people, it's good enough to be worth having this futuristic experience.
So yeah, I think that was a small compromise in my
For your use case.
yeah.
Those are the people who seem more intrigued by it because they're like, yeah, I don't care about the other cameras. You know, it almost feels like they feel like they know they're spending a premium to buy an iPhone Pro, and they feel like part of their money is being wasted on extra camera lenses that they never use.
Yep.
Was that a concern of yours when you were upgrading, losing the other cameras, or
No, not really.
But now that I can show it to people, people are very curious about it. People are super impressed by how thin it is. They're like, wow, that is something.
The nice thing in terms of its form factor is that it's really interesting that I think of some of the movies that I watch where they have a futuristic phone and they're holding the phone like this because it's so
It's
light.
like a credit card.
Yeah, light and paper thin, right? You know? And then I picked up my old phone and I'm like, God, this is a brick.
I feel the same way about this phone. It is really compromised, and yet it's also so amazing to have this light thing in your pocket, or especially between, you know, your fingers, and it feels like a prop from a sci-fi show. And I like that about it.
If you want to dress up and it slides into your suit pocket, like it's actually a problem in iPhone Pro in a suit. because it
Yeah.
either it like bulges out your pocket, you put it in your breast pocket, it sticks out there. This is like the suit iPhone, and in that regard, it makes a lot of sense. It makes both phones better. That's the thing.
It's as promised, basically.
Yeah, it's basically what I was after, is that I didn't want the bulkiness of the device, and it's proven to be very nice.
This one, not for today. We'll talk about that tomorrow.
It is between the Pro and the base model in capabilities as well, which I think is very smart. If they're going to have something in here, make it that smart. And the fact that they, went a different direction with the industrial design, it isn't just, like the base model with a few bonuses. No, it's this cool, new, unique thing that, like, if you want this unique industrial design or this super slim, most of the way, phone, you have to get this model. Like, there is no other choice if this is what you want.
And I'll also say the Air is in a slot that is the worst selling of the four, because it's always been the worst selling of the four. And one of the things we don't know here is this worse or better than the Plus or the Mini? But what I will say is, I strongly suspect that the 17 and the Air will sell better from December on than they are right now.
So they're making it unique. They're drawing in unique buyers that will seek that out. That's great. I think this is a much more promising strategy overall of, like, make a mid-tier spec product with a unique design to fill that slot. That's a great strategy.
It may be a flop. It may not be. It was, like I said, it was already in the slot of two phones that, if you want, you can call flops, that were not good enough for Apple to maintain. But I feel like the Air is going to get a little bit of wind in its sails from people seeing it.
Yeah.
And also from this effect, the random people on the street who need a new iPhone, and they roll in March to an Apple store and they go, whoa, what's this? And they're upgrading from an older phone, and they've just, and because of their priorities, they it's not as much of a compromise, and they really like how thin and light it is.
But I think they made a few too many trade-offs with this implementation of this product, and I don't think it's going to sell well because of those trade-offs.
If this is a phone that is all about the vibes and not about the specs, then the people in our community who are all about the specs, of course, are not going to like it.
In order to understand what this turned into, the first thing you need to get is something else. About every 10 years, Apple has changed processors. Apple's first set of processors they used from 1976 to 1983. Their second set of processors they used from 1984 to 1993. Their third set of processors was from 1994 to 2005. And you'll remember that solidly in the middle here, Steve Jobs came back. Now this era here was called the Power PC era. Power PC has a whole history of its own, which other people can go into. It's kind of an interesting backstory in its own right. But Power PC ultimately was the set of processors that Apple was using when Steve Jobs put together this matrix. But you'll notice something. That, of course, that period came to an end. And so in 2005, Apple announced a transition to Intel.
And yes, it's true. We are going to begin the transition from the Power PC to Intel processors, and we are going to begin it for you now and for our customers next year.
That was the key change that Apple needed before they could break out of this traditional 4-quadrant strategy. But they didn't throw away a good thing. In fact, all they did here was replace it with a new one.
Now, why are we going to do this? Right? Didn't we just get through going from OS 9 to OS 10? Isn't the business great right now? Why do we want another transition? Because we want to be making the best computers for our customer looking forward. Now, I stood up here 2 years ago in front of you, and I promised you this. And we haven't been able to deliver that to you yet. I think a lot of you would like a G5 in your PowerBook, and we haven't been able to deliver that to you yet. But these aren't even the most important reasons.
By 2006, Apple had decided to go and change from the PowerBook to the MacBook Pro. By May of 2006, they created their consumer notebook. And they created the plain old MacBook. Of course, with a soft spot in their heart, they kept the iMac. But then they also had, for the desktop Pro, the Mac Pro.
But these aren't even the most important reasons. The most important reasons are that as we look ahead, though we have great products right now, and we've got some great PowerPC products still yet to come, as we look ahead, we can envision some amazing products we want to build for you. And we don't know how to build them with the future PowerPC roadmap.
So come end of 2006, this was Apple's new product lineup, all based on Intel processors. Now, the rationale for using Intel was one particular metric that they had passed that PowerPC couldn't match. And it may be familiar to those of you who pay attention to these things.
And that's why we're going to do this. When we look at Intel, they've got great performance, yes, but they've got something else that's very important to us. Just as important as performance is power consumption. And the way we look at it is performance per watt. For 1 watt of power, how much performance do you get? And when we look at the future roadmaps projected out mid-2006 and beyond, what we see is the PowerPC gives us sort of 15 units of performance per watt. But the Intel roadmap in the future gives us 70. And so this tells us what we have to do.
But the point of this video is to talk about 2008.
This is the MacBook Air. 0.76 inches down to an unprecedented 0.16 inches. Now, I want to point something out here. The thickest part of the MacBook Air is still thinner than the thinnest part of the TZ series. Okay? We're talking thin here. So, it's so thin, it even fits inside one of these envelopes that we've all seen floating around the office. And so let me go ahead and show it to you now. Let me take it out here. This is the new MacBook Air, and you can get a feel for how thin it is. Yeah, there it is.
The important thing to understand about the MacBook Air is that it doesn't fit anywhere in this 4-quadrant strategy at the beginning of its lifetime. In fact, if you look at its existence, it definitely falls into this side of the diagram towards the notebook category. But even if you look at price-wise, it falls somewhere between the MacBook and the MacBook Pro. Just take a look at the pricing of these products when the original MacBook Air was announced. The MacBook Pro was somewhere around $2,000, $1999. The MacBook, somewhere around $1,000, $1099. And the MacBook Air, announced in January of 2008, $1,799.
I keep coming back, Mike, to the original MacBook Air, where it felt simultaneously like the future and also like it was too early. That's why it was the future.
Yep.
It was just, there were so many, I mean, the word that I used over and over again in those reviews in the early days of the MacBook Air was compromise. I was like, there's so many compromises. And people would say, well, why? Why would you even do it if it's so compromised? And the answer is, yeah, but it's so light.
The reason the Air was so interesting is because Apple was in the middle of changing what premium could mean. Just think about what it meant to buy a computer at that period of time. More premium before the MacBook Air almost always meant that the computer was going to go faster, that had a better processor, maybe more storage. In the case of Apple, it was a better enclosure as well. But when it came to the Air, they positioned it right between the regular old MacBook and the MacBook Pro. And what that meant was that it was more premium than the MacBook Air, but it didn't have as much power as the Pro. In fact, actually, at the time when they released the Air, it didn't have as much power as either of those devices. How do you justify something like that? How do you justify a product that is priced more expensive than your lowest end product, but runs slower? Well, the way that you do it is by making something that is really nice. Something that's nice to use, is designed beautifully, is a statement as a product. One of my favorite lines when I was doing research for this video was from, I think, John Gruber, who was saying that basically the MacBook Air was kind of like the sports car that someone might buy just for the emotion that it evokes in you. And I think that that's the perfect way to put it, which is that it's not the most powerful thing. It's not even the fastest thing. It's just the principle of the thing. It's the thing that makes you feel something.
Okay. So you've liked it so far?
So far, yeah. I think the only negative thing was the heat. I mean, I don't like that so much happening and the potential for that to happen. But like I said, I don't think it's going to be a regular occurrence. I think it'll just be on occasion where it gets warm.
Because of the way that you use your phone.
Because of the way that I use it, yeah.
And that's what the Air was doing at the time. In fact, if you look beyond even just the processing speed, you can... Come here, Misa, come on. You can see other things and see that it was compromised in battery, in storage, in the fact that it didn't have an optical drive at the time. Those were all things that it was contending with against even the lowest end product that Apple had. But that series of compromises allowed Apple to hit a form factor that was appealing to people, and that is what makes the Air name special. But a funny thing happened over time, which is that this strategy, the original 1997 Steve Jobs strategy, okay, we'll go soon. We'll go soon. Yes. Come on, up. Which is that this strategy, the original 1997 This strategy, the original 1997 strategy, felt a lot like a rule of law after Apple invented the Air. Because what happened is that over time, the MacBook Air started to march down market as the components that it was using got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And as it got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, the closer that this $17.99 price began to encroach on the $10.99 price. And as soon as that happened, actually, eventually I think it came to $9.99, just exactly $1,000, the sort of famous price of the MacBook Air. There was really not a lot of reason for the MacBook to exist anymore. And with it, I don't remember exactly the year, the MacBook disappeared. And the Air was the only product that you could buy for the consumer notebook that Apple created.
Yeah, so I really like it.
That's exciting.
And I think, I think this is sort of the, well, I want to say the future, but
yeah,
because I think that
it just feels good, probably.
Yeah, the lightness of it is just something to, that's aesthetically and functionally, I think, more appealing to people.
It's kind of an interesting story because what that means is that design was something that Apple had aimed for. And as the technology got better and better and better, it justified it more and more and more as a bottom of the line consumer product. But at the same time as that technology got better and better and better, the MacBook Pro was able to more and more take the cues of that form factor from the MacBook Air and incorporate that into the upper end lines. Somebody should research this, and maybe I will eventually, but I'm pretty sure that modern MacBook Pros are as skinny as the thickest parts of that original MacBook Air, which tells you something about how these things are designed and what role design has in the way that Apple approaches products.
For you, the reason you got it is for that reason, right? Like you were specifically aimed, like the form factor was the thing that you were aiming for, and that's why you're willing to compromise on something like the camera, which is much less important to you, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
So, when you ask the question who the iPhone Air is for, I think you have to look back to the history of the MacBook Air and the history of the Air line in general, with all of Apple's products. The Air is for the person who wants to reach into the future and is willing to make compromises in the present to do so. In the past, for somebody who didn't need all of that power overhead that a MacBook Pro could offer, they could get the Air and get a taste of what it was like to have the ultra portable, ultra light MacBook Air. In the modern era, that's true of the devices that we carry with us everywhere, our iPhones. For the type of person like my dad who doesn't need all of the extra cameras on his device, or the type of person who doesn't need the absolute most power out of their computer that they carry in their pocket, well, a device that has a damn good processor and an amazing main camera may be just enough, and a good enough compromise to make to say that you're getting the thinnest iPhone of all time. Now, there's a second answer to the question, which we also talked about, which is that a device like that is bound to become, as a lot of people say, the future of the lineup. And what that means is that the sort of design trade-offs will, as technology marches on, become less and less pronounced. In the MacBook's case, that means that the MacBook Pro may someday be as thin as the first generation MacBook Air. In the iPhone, that could be the exact same case. Now, when it comes to the low end of the product line, well, we can see the same thing, which is that with the MacBook Air, as technology marched on and as the premium nature of the design became sort of the status quo, we started to see the device itself march down the lineup. And that was the fate of that product. And so what that means is that the current Air is for the type of person who is okay with the future consumer level product, but wants it today. And I think that's why a lot of people have compared this launch to the iPhone X redesign, which also launched with a previous slate of the iPhone lineup and the previous design of the product, because this is one of the most radical redesigns that we've seen in a very long time.
Cool. I'm glad that you like it so far. I'm
skeptical.
I wasn't skeptical, actually, because I remember I came in here and I was talking to you about it when they announced it. And I remember saying, I came in and I said, I just don't know who that phone is for. And you're like, oh, actually, I was thinking about it. I was like, you know what? That would work for you.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the perfect phone for you in some ways. Yeah.
I mean, I almost, because of the titanium, I'm almost thinking I may not even really need a case, or it's going to be a very minimalistic case. Right now, the only case that I've really, I ordered it was the Apple bumper, so it's just a bumper around the edges. So in case I do drop it, it won't,
scuff
it'll
things
protect
up,
it
and it'll be
little
more.
bit,
Yeah, bring back bumpers. That's what I want on my phone too, by the way.
Oh, is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you.
It's not very light blue, not what I envisioned it being.
Yeah.
So I was almost like, they sent me the wrong phone.